A student I know very well and trust walks into my office, comes in, sits down, and bursts into tears. And what I learned is that student was accused of plagiarism by a faculty member, and that student didn't do it, but it looks like they did. And the way that plagiarism is understood, if it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck, it's a duck. I want to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And that's why I want to make sure that we're really clear about what plagiarism is. You may think that you know, but I think it's a little bit more confusing, and I want to explain to you both what's confusing about it, and I also want to explain to you why it's taken so much more seriously in college than it is in high school. Most people know the first three: bought and copied, shared whole papers. Obviously, that's plagiarism. You know what you're doing. Some people have also been told that it has to do with the quantity of words. If you use 3 or more words from a sentence or 5 or more words for a sentence, if you use important words, and all that's true, but there's more to it than that. You can also plagiarize yourself, which hardly anybody knows about. But I'm going to show you a little bit later on in UNF's Academic Integrity Code that if you write a paper for one class and then you turn it in for another class as well, you have plagiarized yourself, and that is a violation of the Academic Integrity Code, even though it's you that wrote it. Another kind of plagiarism, and this is one that I see probably most often, is facts. I think people get confused about the difference between paraphrasing, which is when you don't use the exact words, you've put it into your own words, but you're using information that comes from somewhere, and quoting, which is when you've used the exact words. So if you put it into your own words, you're paraphrasing and you don't need to use quote marks, but you still need to cite it. Basically, the rule is that any information that is not common knowledge, that comes from anywhere else, needs to be mentioned. There's a kind of a confusing case where common knowledge can be in a class. So if you're in a class that's all about the American Revolution, then lots of details beyond 1776 may become common knowledge in that class and don't need to be cited. But if, say, you've taken an AP class and you know this because of your AP class, you want to indicate if you know a specific date because you remember it from your AP class, you might want to say, in my AP US history, I learned blah, 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 something like that, so that if it's common knowledge to you, but you suspect it isn't, your professor won't necessarily understand that, you want to indicate, because any kind of a fact, so this is what I see most often, is where I see a bunch of numbers on a page and no citations, and those numbers are very specific and not the kind of thing that I know, that everybody knows. That's plagiarism. And the other one that people don't understand often is that you can plagiarize ideas. You haven't used a single word that came from a source, but you've taken all of the ideas. Basically, anything that did not come from your own brain needs to be cited, and that's not always clear to students. I want to show you some excerpts from UNF's Academic Integrity Code so that you understand the breadth of things that can get you into trouble, because again, there are things on here that people don't realize. Under cheating, I've given you a list. Attempting to use unauthorized materials. So for instance, if I tell you that you need to read this poem and I don't want you going onto the internet, and you go onto the internet, that gets counted as cheating if I can show that you actually did that. Fabrication and falsification. There are lots of times where students know that their papers need citations, and so they make them up. And that also counts as a violation of the Academic Integrity Code. And here's the one about plagiarizing yourself: multiple submissions. I'm going to read the whole thing. Substantial portions of the same academic work for credit, including oral reports, more than once. So you can plagiarize yourself. Now that may sound like, how on earth can I plagiarize myself? I wrote it. Why can't I submit it in more than one place? And the answer is that when in all of your classes, we always expect that you're doing original work, that you are doing the work that we have for the class. And that's because what's important in college often is the process, not the product. So the product is the answer, is the paper, is the test results, right? That's not actually what we care about. What we really care about is the process that got you to that. So if I wanted to know the answer to any kind of academic question. I wouldn't be asking freshmen. I would go research it, and I would see what PhDs who spent their lives studying that want. I'm not interested in the answer. I'm interested in having you go through the process of getting to the answer. A lot of college is about the skills, not the product. It's the skills that you use to get to the product. And so anytime that you take a shortcut that prevents you from going through that process, that's a problem. So it's not that I want the paper or even the information in the paper. I want you to have gone through the process of writing the paper because it's that skill that I'm trying to build, which is why you can't submit the same academic work for credit more than once. We want you to do it twice. We want you to write 2 papers, not 1 paper. Still more ways. Plagiarism, presenting the work of another as one's own. And then this is one that often people don't know about, complicity in academic dishonesty. So if you lend your paper to somebody and they plagiarize it, you can get in trouble as well. So again, I'm really concerned that to make sure that you guys understand the breadth of ways. It's not a plagiarism code or a cheating code, it's an academic integrity code, and it's really broad, and I want to make sure that you understand it so that you don't inadvertently get caught by it, because I have seen this happen. And the consequences can be really harsh. The first 3 are the ones that are the most used, and in fact, I think probably the one that's the most used of all is this one, where you get an F on the piece of work, but it doesn't necessarily have an enormous impact on your grade. But we have these other things that, again, you need to know about. I've had once in my entire career had to use this, the unforgivable F. And what this is an F for the class that is a punitive F. It is marked in a different way on your transcript so that it is clear that this was given for a violation of academic integrity, and it's not that you just didn't complete the work for the class. So that on your permanent record, if you get an unforgivable F, everybody who sees your transcript will know that you violated UNF's academic integrity code in such a way that the professor felt like they needed to give you a permanent marking on your record. It's also, UNF has a grade forgiveness policy. You can't forgive that F. You can't replace that F, so that there's no way to fix your GPA after you get that. So that's a really serious one that you want to know about. And then, of course, there's suspension and expulsion. And again, we take it much more seriously in college than we do in high school, and so it's really important to know the risks that you're taking. So why is it such a big deal? Here are some statistics. Over 75% of students self-report that they cheat. Half of students plagiarize. So it's an enormous activity that students are doing. 41% don't call it plagiarizing, but they, quote, weave sentences from different sources without citations, which actually is plagiarism, but they don't even think of it that way. So in addition to the 50% who say, yeah, I plagiarize, you got another 41 who do this sentence weaving thing. And then this is the statistic that's most upsetting to faculty members. 68% don't think it's a big deal. And the problem here is that you've got this big gulf between the way that students understand it and the way that faculty understand it. So 68% of students don't even think it's a big deal. But to your faculty, when we see those statistics that 75% of our students cheat, 50% plagiarize, it looks like the end of the world. It looks like the apocalypse. It looks like we've got a group of students, that this generation of students or whatever is somehow willing to cheat and don't even think it's a big deal. And so maybe that explains why we've had all sorts of economic problems coming from groups of people doing essentially white-collar crime and not even really getting punished for it. So it's a big deal because faculty see it in a moral way, but students somehow don't. And that's an enormous gulf and really important. It's also a cultural misunderstanding. So when faculty think about cheating, the metaphor that they most often use is that you're stealing. And I think it's a metaphor that doesn't really make sense to students. I think from a student perspective, when I think about that 68% who don't think it's a big deal, I don't think that most people are bad people. I look at a class of 200, I don't think I've got 68% of them are people who are going to be routinely cheating. I think there's something else going on there. And my sense is that it's that students see plagiarism as expediency. The stealing metaphor doesn't actually make a lot of sense because the students have always said to me, but how could I steal it? It's still there. I didn't take anything. I just maybe borrowed is a better word. And so From a student perspective, this doesn't make sense. They think of it more like a takeout pizza. You know it isn't good for you, but as long as you don't do it too much, and sometimes you just don't have the time, you've got to dial up a pizza. Same thing. You know that you would be better off if you wrote that paper, but is it going to make a big difference in the long run if occasionally you don't write your papers? No. So students see it as expediency, where faculty see it as a crime. And I think what I've been trying to do when I talk to faculty members is shift that metaphor from stealing to lying, because I think lying makes more sense. Basically what happens is I ask you to write a paper, and by writing a paper which you didn't, and what I'm asking you to do is to think about something. So I've assigned you a hard poem, and I want you to think it through. And instead of thinking it through, you hop on the internet, you find what somebody else has thought about, you close it, and then you write your own version. That's why plagiarism of ideas is as bad as plagiarism of words, because it's not that you've stolen somebody's words, it's that you didn't do the work. I wanted you to think, and you have avoided thinking. And you've lied about it because you've handed in a paper which looks like you've thought about it, and I have to dig and figure out, no, this person didn't think about it, this person hopped on the internet. So if you think about it as lying, that might actually be more convincing, I think, to students, because I think most students don't see themselves as liars. They see themselves as kind of taking a shortcut. But when you realize that from a faculty perspective, it is, you've lied, I think people will be less likely to do it. So think about it that way, that when you're plagiarizing, you're lying, and it's a bad kind of lying because you're lying to somebody who's trying to help you. You're kind of lying to get out of trouble when somebody's trying to help you, and you're making your faculty member read that thing that you didn't write, and they're going to grade it, and they're going to put time into it, and it isn't what it looks like it is. So maybe that'll help. So why should you not take those shortcuts? The first thing is that what is important in college is the process, the act of doing the thinking, the act of doing the research, the act of doing the writing. That's what the assignment is, not the actual assignment itself. The idea that you're lying to somebody who's trying to help you should also help convince you not to. And then finally, the potentially harsh consequences, I hope, will convince you to be super careful. But there are also benefits beyond safety. When you, instead of hiding the fact that you have hopped on the internet, if you go on to the right places on the internet and get good information from good sources and then think about those sources so that you're still doing the thinking, you're thinking about what somebody said instead of maybe thinking about the topic on its own, that's going to be a benefit. And here's an example where citing actually strengthens the paper. According to the United Nations, more than 2 million people died in the latest of Sudan's civil wars. I'm going to trust something that came from the United Nations, because the United Nations is an organization that's nonpartisan and is keeping track of things like deaths in civil wars. So it doesn't only, by citing, it doesn't only protect me from plagiarism, but it actually makes the paper stronger. The alternative is 4 million people died, which I just read on the internet or I made up in my head. So that's the other reason that you want to think about being super careful about citing, is that it doesn't just protect you, but it can actually strengthen the paper. In the next video, I'm going to show you exactly how to cite things properly so that there's no question. Good luck.